There's a weight. A familiar one. The kind of weight that comes from having loved someone in a way that required a lot of you. A lot of patience. A lot of grace. A lot of quietly swallowing things that probably should have been said out loud. And I'm not going to call it a mistake, because I don't think it was. I think you loved in the only way you knew how. Fully. With your whole self. And for a long time, that felt like the right thing to do. It felt like if you just stayed steady enough, patient enough, understanding enough, something would shift. Something would click for them. They would see what was right in front of them. And some of you are sitting with the very sore realization that it didn't quite happen that way. I want to say something here, and I want you to really receive it. What you're feeling isn't just sadness. There's something underneath it. Something that feels like confusion mixed with grief mixed with a very quiet anger that you've probably not given yourself full permission to feel. Because you were so focused on being the bigger person. On being loving. On not making it difficult. That somewhere along the way, your own pain became background noise, even to yourself. That ends here. That shifts here. The energy that's coming forward first, and it's quite heavy, quite shadowy, feels like guilt. But it's not your guilt. Let me be very clear about that. This is the guilt of the person who left. Or the person who stayed but wasn't really present. Or the person who took the warmth you offered and somehow convinced themselves they weren't doing anything wrong. There's a particular energy here that I feel when someone has been treating another person poorly but has wrapped it in so many justifications that they've almost made themselves believe it was okay. Almost. Because there's something underneath that they can't quite shake. A low hum of knowing. Of awareness. Of guilt that they've been either suppressing or avoiding or pouring into other things so they don't have to sit with it. They didn't want to face what they were doing. Or what they were not doing. And here's what's interesting, because this is where it gets deeper, there's also this layer of illusion around them. A kind of fog they've been living in around their own sense of self-worth. Now that might surprise some of you, because often when someone mistreats us we assume they must think very highly of themselves. But what's coming through is something more complex than that. There's a person here who has been running from their own reflection. Who has been avoiding the quieter moments because in the quiet they have to face things about themselves they're not ready to face. And so it became easier to keep moving. To keep distracting. To keep themselves convinced that they were fine, that things were fine, that you were too sensitive or too much or too needing of things they somehow decided they didn't have to give. This is interesting. Because what I'm seeing now is that the way they treated you had very little to do with your value. And everything to do with their inability to hold space for someone who loved them genuinely. Real love, the kind you were offering, requires a person to show up. To be present. To be accountable. And they weren't ready for that. They may not have even known they weren't ready. But their soul knew. And instead of doing the hard work of growing into it, they took the easier path. Which was to keep you at just enough of a distance that they didn't have to fully commit to the discomfort of becoming someone better. Does this feel familiar to some of you? The heartbreaking thing, and I say this with so much compassion, is that you probably sensed all of this on some level. You probably had moments where something felt off. Where the words and the actions didn't match. Where you gave them the benefit of the doubt again and again because you wanted to believe in who they could be, not just who they were showing up as. And that's not naivety. That's love. That's you seeing potential. That's you caring enough to hold space for someone's becoming. The problem is that they let you hold all of it, all the hope, all the believing, all the carrying, while they moved through things untethered and unaccountable. You were doing the emotional work for both of you. And part of you knew it was unequal. But you stayed anyway. And for some of you, there's still a part that wonders if staying would have eventually changed something. I want to gently say, the energy doesn't show that. What it shows is that they needed to meet a different kind of reflection. Not you. Something else. Someone else. A situation that would hold up a mirror in a way they couldn't walk away from. And that's exactly what's happening now. Or what's about to happen. This is where the energy shifts quite significantly, and I want you to stay with me here because this is important. There's a new chapter beginning for this person. And it doesn't look the way they thought it would. What's coming through is that they're encountering, or are about to encounter, someone or a situation that reflects back to them exactly what they put you through. Not as punishment. Not as karma in the dramatic, theatrical sense that people sometimes expect. But as a mirror. Life has a very precise way of giving us the exact experience we need in order to understand what we've been unable to understand any other way. And for someone who couldn't fully grasp what they were doing to you, who perhaps told themselves a story about you being too emotional, too demanding, too attached, they now get to feel it from the inside. They're going to understand what it feels like to offer yourself to someone who doesn't fully receive you. They're going to understand what it's like to give more than you get back. To try. To wonder. To reach for connection and find someone who's not quite meeting them there. And in those moments, and there will be real, quiet, lonely moments, something is going to surface in them. A recognition. A memory of you. Not in an idealized way at first. But in a grounded, sober way. Oh. This is what that felt like, kind of way. The energy keeps repeating something around this, almost like a slow awakening. Like someone coming out of a fog they've been in for a long time without realizing the fog was there. There's a moment of real emotional clarity coming for them. And it's the kind of clarity that changes people. Not all at once. Not dramatically. But something inside them reorganizes. Some of you might be wondering, does this mean they'll come back? And I want to be honest with you here because this reading isn't about predicting their next move. It's about you understanding what's actually happening beneath all of this. What I can say is that for some of you, there is a real energy of return. But it's not the anxious, desperate return of someone who just doesn't want to be alone. There's something more genuine being built first. A real reckoning. A real maturation. Because while all of this has been unfolding for them, you have been quietly, sometimes painfully, sometimes reluctantly, growing. And I see someone who has surrendered something they've been holding on to for a long time. Not given up. Surrendered. There's a difference. Giving up feels like defeat. Surrendering feels like release. Like finally putting down something heavy that you were carrying because you didn't know you were allowed to set it down. And for some of you, that surrender didn't happen gracefully. It happened in tears. It happened in a very long night where something finally broke open inside you and you just let go. You stopped trying to hold the whole thing together. You stopped trying to understand it. You allowed yourself to not have the answers. And that was the turning point. Even if it didn't feel like one at the time. There's such a beautiful and sacred energy around what's happening in your life right now that I almost want to pause here and let you feel it. Because I know that when you're in the middle of healing, it doesn't always feel sacred. It often just feels hard. And uncertain. And lonely in a particular way. But there is something being woven for you. Piece by piece. And the pieces look small right now, a day that felt a little lighter, a moment where you laughed and it didn't feel guilty, a thought about the future that didn't feel heavy, but they are adding up to something. The energy I'm sitting with right now is something I can only describe as alignment. A cosmic, larger than circumstances kind of alignment. Like pieces of your life that got scattered during this relationship, pieces of yourself that you muted or set aside, or allowed to shrink to make space for someone else, those pieces are coming back. Not all at once. But they're returning to you. And as they do, you're going to recognize yourself again in a way that is going to feel both like a reunion and like a quiet revelation. Have you noticed small things starting to shift? Even if it's just the way you've been thinking lately. Even if it's just a slightly different relationship to your own peace. Even if you're still processing, which is completely okay, there's something different underneath it all. An energy that wasn't there before. A solidity. A groundedness that this whole experience, as painful as it was, gave you. Because you learned something through what you went through. Something about what you need. Something about what you will and won't accept. Something about the difference between loving someone and losing yourself in them. And that knowing doesn't leave you. It becomes part of you. You're not the same person who walked into that situation. I want to take a moment here for whoever needs to hear this, because the energy is very insistent about this. You did not stay too long because you were foolish. You stayed because you loved. And love is not weakness. Love is not a character flaw. The fact that you gave so much of yourself to another person says something beautiful about who you are. The lesson, if we can call it that, wasn't that you shouldn't love that deeply. The lesson is about discernment. About learning the difference between someone who is a good person going through difficult things and someone who is using your goodness as permission to not do their own work. That distinction matters. And you know it now in a way that lives in your bones rather than just in your head. This is a collective reading, so I want to honor that not everything may apply. Take what feels true for you and release the rest. But for those it does apply to, I'm also sensing something about timing that I want to speak to carefully. There's this feeling of things moving differently now. Not slower, not faster, just differently. More aligned. Like the next things that come into your life are going to feel more chosen. More resonant. More like they belong to the version of you that you're becoming rather than the version of you that was trying to fit into someone else's life. And that's going to feel unfamiliar at first. Because we get used to reaching, adjusting, compromising. But what's coming is something that doesn't require you to diminish yourself to make it fit. That's worth waiting for. It almost feels like someone wants to say, and this is just what I'm sensing, take it if it resonates, something like, I didn't realize what I had until I experienced what it felt like to not have it. And I feel like that message is genuine. Not manipulative. Not strategic. Just real. The kind of real that only comes when someone finally has the experience that makes the abstract feel concrete. There's more to this than it first appeared. Because underneath all of it, the guilt they're carrying, the illusions they've been living inside, the reckoning that's coming for them, there's a love story. A real one. One that was interrupted by someone's unreadiness rather than destroyed by an absence of feeling. Now, what happens with that is not fully written yet. Some of you will find that this chapter has a continuation. Some of you will find that the love was real but the relationship was not meant to be the final destination, and that something even more aligned is being prepared for you. Both of those outcomes are valid. Both of them require you to stay rooted in yourself. That's the thread through all of this. You. Not them. Not the reunion. Not the closure from them, which may or may not come in the form you expect. But you. Your clarity. Your self-trust. Your willingness to keep showing up for your own life even when it felt like the hardest thing to do. That's where the power is. That's always been where the power is. And I'll say this as we come to the end of this energy, because I feel it naturally settling, completing. There's something really significant about the fact that you're here. Reading this. Feeling this. Still curious about your own story and where it's going. That's not the behavior of someone who gave up on themselves. That's the behavior of someone who is still invested in their own becoming. And that matters more than you know. You are not waiting anymore. Even if it still feels like waiting, something in you has shifted into motion. Your energy is moving differently now. Forward and inward at the same time, becoming more fully yourself while quietly moving toward what's meant for you. Trust that. Even on the days when you can't see it clearly. Especially on those days.